Okay. We have people online already. Welcome. I'm seeing the numbers increasing here, so I think people are still joining a little bit, and apologies that we're a couple of minutes late. Ia, would you like to take over and we can kickstart, so then while people are joining, we can say our introductions?
Very happy to. Thank you, Alex. So hello, everyone. My name is Adlercreutz, and I am the CEO of Co-Founders, and I'm very happy to welcome you all to join our second Artful Leaders event today. At Co-Founders, we help businesses lead their culture, brand, and ecosystem relations in a holistic and creative way, always based on data and insights. Our purpose really is to help organizations live meaningful lives. And as collaboration is key to success, we established the Artful Leaders Club to bring together forward-looking leaders and thinkers from different areas of expertise and from different corners of the world. Today, we will discuss the importance of ecosystem relations to our businesses. I want to warmly welcome our guest speakers, Dr. Jakub, Dr. Thomas Girst, and the two members of our Lionhearts community, Lila, Simola, Cormier, and Jamin Hu. But before I introduce them more closely, please let me shortly introduce also our team members at Co-Founders who will accompany me today in hosting this event. First, please meet Sonja Lahtinen, our research director.
Hello to you all. Happy to have you all with us.
And our strategist, Max Mickelsson.
Hello.
And Alexandra Marila.
Hi, everyone.
And now let me introduce to our guest speakers. First, Dr. Jakub, whose talks and thoughts have really inspired me personally and who we are now privileged to host. Jay is the Chief Advocacy Officer of the Economics of Mutuality, EOM, Foundation, Senior Client Advisor of EOM Solutions, and the Strategic Advisor at Thompson Family Office. Jay has a doctorate from Oxford University. He's a frequent speaker at international business conferences and leading universities. Jay will today reveal to us how to put purpose into practice in companies by the Economics of Mutuality, which is a breakthrough business model and management innovation pioneered by Mars. Jay joins us from Washington, D.C. Warmly welcome, Jay.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. And it's my great pleasure to be able to share a bit of my favorite topic, which is the economics of mutuality with you all today.
Very happy to have you with us. And then as our second speaker is Professor Dr. Thomas Girst, who is the Global Head of Cultural Engagement at BMW Group. And Thomas leads engagement programs involving a wide range of stakeholders from businesses, arts, and culture. He also lectures at international universities. And in 2016, he received the European Cultural Manager of the Year Award. Today, Thomas will speak about nurturing key partnerships that bring inspiration and creativity to businesses while supporting the arts and culture sector in these very challenging times. Thomas joins us from Munich. Welcome, Thomas.
Hi, looking forward. Thank you.
And last but not least, we have two members of the Lionhearts community, Lila Cormier Simola and Jamin Hu. Lila works as a community manager at Co-Founders, and while at the same time studying politics, economics, and philosophy at the University of Warwick in the UK. Lila has also an extensive multicultural background, and this is one of the reasons why she was chosen to co-create and lead the community. Lila will today tell us how Lionhearts, this global community of young, bright minds, can help businesses nurture a holistic ecosystem thinking and address the next gen's increasing demands for sustainability. Jamin, on the other hand, is a community member, but also an entrepreneur, an inventor, and a pianist. He co-founded the augmented reality startup Port 6, creating user interfaces of the future. He studies biomedical engineering at Imperial College in London and classical piano at the University of Arts in Helsinki. Jamin will present a Lionhearts case study with the Baltic Sea Action Group, where the community helped the organization deepen the understanding of young people's thinking and expectations towards the NGO. Welcome all.
Thank you very much for the introduction.
And now, Alex, would you please still walk us through our today's agenda and some practicalities before we invite our guest speakers to enter the stage?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Ia. So Ia gave already an overview of what everyone will talk about. We've gone through our welcome and introductions, and then we'll start the first session with Dr. Jakub, how to put purpose into practice. We'll go to where do we go from here with Dr. Thomas Girst, and then why having a Lionheart helps with Lila and Jamin. And then we'll wrap up with conclusions and takeaways. After each speaking session, we will have a Q&A session. So each speaker will have 20 minutes, and then we'll take 10 minutes for the Q&A. Please feel free to write all of your questions in the Q&A box during the event. So we'll gather them at the end and we'll try to answer as many as possible in the due time. And general comments and feedback, you can write to us in the chat box, and you can share your thoughts from this event using the hashtag Artful Leaders on social media. You can tag us and then we'll be happy to reshare your posts. So without further ado, Dr. Jakub, welcome and please.
Thank you again, Alexandra. I'm really looking forward to sharing a bit about this, what was described in the introduction as a breakthrough and I think transformational business model management innovation that actually was given birth to inside the internal think tank of Mars Incorporated, which some of you may know is a global food and beverage company. It's about $40 billion in annual revenues, family-owned, privately held, employs about 130,000 what are called associates worldwide. So I spent the last 13 and a half, 14 years actually helping the chief economist of Mars lead the work in this area through that internal think tank, which was created way back in the 1960s. And actually, the way this started, this work on this business model innovation, this management innovation, was really with a very interesting question that was asked by one of the Mars family members, one of the owners of Mars Incorporated, at the end of 2006. And the question was really, what should the right level of profit be for the company? And this was kind of a fascinating question for us coming from a shareholder, because most shareholders in today's global economy, which is dominated by financial capitalism, that of Milton Friedman in the Chicago School of Business, the only time a shareholder asks a question about profit is really to expect the answer of as much as possible profit extracted from stakeholders back to the center, back to the firm, and ultimately distributed to its shareholders. But actually, this question was really more about a company being only as strong as the weakest link in its value chain. And so there was what was behind this question was really something much deeper, that maybe there was an optimum level of profit beyond which you could actually be extracting more than is your right, and you could wind up creating a squeezing effect among your partners in business, and that squeezing effect would create some sort of a disequilibrium in the business activity, and ultimately it would disadvantage the company, and you would never see it coming. So we took a look, as we tended to do when we were a think tank before we moved into a foundation and a consultancy late last year, and we looked at what everyone else was doing in the world on this topic. So we reviewed all the management literature, and we were kind of stunned to discover that there was nothing. It was like a gaping black hole about this question of what should the right optimum level of profit be. It really had not been addressed in any comprehensive or meaningful way. So we thought, okay, is this a really new question, the right level of profit, or is this something that's been around for a while? And we actually came across something written by King Solomon thousands of years ago that was quite inspiring to us. It was that a man may give freely and still have his wealth be increased, and another may keep back more than his right, but only comes to be in need. So far from being a brand new question, this was actually something people in the world have been wrestling with for thousands of years. So based on that, we started this work. And my talk, I think, is called Putting Purpose into Practice, which is quite important because purpose is really at the center of everything that we do in this work. I would start actually with the premise that the purpose of business is actually not to create profit, as odd as that sounds. The purpose of business is actually to create profitable solutions to the problems of people and planet, not to profit by creating problems for people and planet. So I just want to say that one more time because it's something that captures the essence of what we're trying to do here at the very macro level, that the purpose of business is not to create profit. Its purpose is to create profitable solutions to the problems of people and planet, not to profit by creating problems for people and planet. So in sum, really what we're doing with the economics of mutuality is we're aligning what the company says its purpose is and the incentives for management behavior in a way that actually can deliver a superior form of value creation holistically for people and planet, but also profitably, because we're finding as we apply this approach of solving problems of other stakeholders in any ecosystem that's around any business activity, that instead of trying to just extract value from those stakeholders, but actually trying to orchestrate through the ecosystem solutions to whatever is hindering the stakeholders from delivering their part of the shared purpose that should really be at the center of any activity and be the lens through which you decide how to populate an ecosystem, that creates a much more performant ecosystem, and it winds up delivering greater holistic value, even financial value. So unlike a traditional corporate social responsibility initiative or a sustainability program, which tends to require a trade-off of some profit to do some good for people and planet, often in ways that don't really scale up because they're not profitable enough to be self-sustaining, which is really the most important thing if you're going to scale something globally. We actually have removed that limitation through the economics of mutuality, that trade-off. And we're finding actually by aligning your business practices to deliver what you say your purpose is, and using what we call non-financial forms of capital, as well as financial capital, which I'm going to talk about in just a moment, what those are, that actually you could wind up capturing more of the value that is actually at the disposal of a corporation that companies create, destroy, and could leverage if they knew how to measure and mobilize all the forms of capital, social, human, and natural capital, as well as financial capital. And that's really what this work is about. So without further ado, because I only have a short period of time to summarize this, so I'm just going to give you kind of a top line look at the kind of 5 pillars that comprise economics of mutuality. And this is something I should say we have been working on now for about 14 years, and that we've deployed in maybe 15 different parts of the Mars business, but also with a large French multinational retail company, and now through a partnership with a private equity firm in its various tech company assets. So this is gradually growing into what we hope will be a global movement, and we're taking it into different sectors of the economy, and we're seeing quite significant positive business results when we operate in this way. So getting back to how this works in a step-by-step manner. So very succinctly, purpose, as I mentioned, is really at the center of any ecosystem being the theme for today's talk. An ecosystem is really populated by different stakeholders. And in a traditional way of thinking for business, the business tends to put itself, the firm, at the center of the ecosystem. And at the center of the center is the profit maximization for shareholders. And then the relationships with the ecosystem stakeholders who are on the periphery are really like spokes on a wagon wheel, and they're really set up to extract as much value from the stakeholders as possible and to keep for oneself. This is a bit overly simplistic, but I just wanted to give you kind of that sense of a wagon wheel with spokes emanating from the firm at the center and profit at the center as the way in which traditional business activities are run, are defined. Well, in economics of mutuality, we actually move the firm and its profit to the periphery, and the firm becomes just another stakeholder in an ecosystem of stakeholders that are grouped around a shared sense of purpose. And this putting the purpose at the center is almost something that we call a Copernican revolution. If you remember Nicholas Copernicus, the 16th century astronomer, he figured out that it was actually the sun at the center of the solar system and not the earth. And as soon as he got people to agree with that, all the mathematics of the time made sense. So using this with a business analogy, when you put purpose at the center rather than profit, actually business activities start to make more sense, and you have the right lens through which you can determine who the right stakeholders are that you need around any business activity to actually deliver this sense of shared purpose that brought you all together to do that business activity. The next thing that we do is we actually change the way in which purposes are framed. Companies tend to make grandiose purpose statements, and they're usually based around the values of the company, or maybe it's a description of what the company does. Actually, what we're looking for in economics of mutuality is making purpose actionable as what we call a meaningful challenge. So it's an outside-in perspective rather than an inside-out perspective, and it's something that identifies a problem that you want to solve for the rest, basically in its most simple terms. And I'll give you just a basic example of a company that we're not working with, but we admire greatly, which is called Novo Nordisk, a Scandinavian company that makes insulin. And years ago, it had as a purpose selling more insulin to treat the symptom of diabetes. Well, this didn't get them very far in terms of how they were perceived by their stakeholders in their ecosystem, because they were viewed as just another vendor that's making money from selling a treatment for an underlying disease. Well, they thought about how they could repurpose themselves as a meaningful challenge, how to solve the problems of another, and it really revolutionized their business and how they were perceived by their partners. They changed from selling more insulin to solving diabetes or changing diabetes, and this really positioned them alongside all of their stakeholders in going after a solution to fix the problem at its cause. And that really differentiated it from its competitors in the space. And it was very counterintuitive for a company to do that, because if you solve diabetes, then you could potentially be out of business because you're not selling any more insulin. But it really repositioned the thinking of the company and its management practices and how it was perceived. And it became the preferred vendor of so many in its ecosystem, because they wanted a company to be working alongside that actually was there to solve the underlying problem. So again, this is a bit overly simplistic, but at Mars Incorporated, when we started working with a business unit in the pet care segment that was selling a nutraceutical kind of very high quality pet food called Royal Canin, we started at the top with Mars's corporate purpose, which was the world we want tomorrow starts with how we do business today. Okay, very nice and good, but it's something that's not very actionable at a unit level, and it's really more a values statement. So we took it down through the business segment of pet care, which was really about a better life for pets, and ultimately we brought it down to the business unit level, and it was really about improving the lives of cats and dogs implicitly through nutrition. And this gave us something that we really could work with to start the work of the economics of mutuality. So the next step in this journey was really to move into the ecosystem part of this activity. And with the business and having defined this purpose, using that as a lens and populating the ecosystem with the right stakeholders. Once we've identified who the key stakeholders are necessary to help that pet food company, in this case, to deliver its purpose, and this could be populated by breeders, by veterinarians, by retail outlets, by the pet owners themselves. These are the types of key stakeholders that you would unearth as you start to do an ecosystem map. We map those key stakeholders out, and then we spend some time with them, with a subset of them, interviewing them to try to surface what we call their pain points. So what is going on in their lives that's obstructing their ability actually to fully deliver their part of the shared purpose? Then we do an analysis and a prioritization with the business on what kind of pain points are these. So if you think about it in a medical analogy, we do kind of a diagnosis to figure out what the pain points are. And this brings us to the next piece, which is really about the non-financial forms of capital. I mentioned those briefly in the introduction, and I'll just say a few words about them. We really look at expanding the definition of performance of a company beyond purely financial capital to the other three forms of capital also, which are social capital, human capital, and natural capital. And very briefly, social capital we measure by looking at trust, social cohesiveness in a community, and the capacity of that community to work collectively towards a common good. And we've determined that we can capture in any business situation, in any market situation, about 80% of what a social capital space looks like simply by looking at trust, social cohesiveness, and the capacity to work collectively. In the area of human capital, which is another form of people capital that has value to a business activity, it's really more at an individual level, identifying what the true drivers of well-being are in the workplace. And at Mars, for example, we discovered that the true drivers of well-being, and number one by far, was do managers in that company walk the talk of the values that they talk about, that they espouse. That was far more important to employees of the company than, say, wage disparity. Prospect of upward mobility was another key element of a driver of well-being in the culture of that particular workforce. And you're likely to find different drivers of well-being as you work in different companies that have different corporate cultures, but this approach of measuring human capital is really quite standard. And we've pretty much perfected how to do this in a simple, stable way. And why that's important is that once you know what the true drivers of well-being are, then you can start to craft interventions to grow the human capital of your workforce around the things that they care about. And when you do that, you get three benefits. The first is talent attraction. The second is talent retention, which is even more important in this kind of economy, which really has a shortage of talent matching the jobs that are being created. And finally, you have an optimization of people's performance, because people who are happy and fulfilled in the workplace, they're actually achieving their purpose through their work. They actually do perform at a higher level, and that adds to the value of the company. Similarly, we discovered that if you grow social capital, just like if you grow human capital, that you do get a correlation with economic output and financial performance. So this means that if you actually can grow these forms of non-financial capital with the way in which you operate your businesses, you can expect your ecosystem actually to perform better and your financial performance also to be a superior one at the end. And then the last form of capital that we work with is called natural capital. And most companies will have one metric that they use to measure and look at natural resources that they utilize. And that's usually carbon footprint, which is fine and good, but that's an external reporting and benchmarking kind of tool. It's not really something that helps managers manage to more resource efficient outcomes. So we work with a school of thought that's called the inputs approach. And in the inputs approach, there are 5 simple metrics, actually not all of which are actionable, but that account for about 80% of all the natural resources that are utilized in the manufacture of an automobile or a manufacture of a candy bar or a bag of rice. They're pretty much the same. And we found that actually through a basic analysis, which we call a life cycle analysis, of we can determine with pretty good accuracy which one or more of those core input metrics are affected by what aspect of your business, and we can help identify solutions to manage to more resource efficient outcomes. So just getting back to this ecosystem orchestration piece, after we've mapped out the ecosystem around that sense of shared purpose, and we've identified who the key stakeholders are, we've identified what their pain points are, what their problems are, and we've identified whether those pain points are social capital in nature. So does it have to do with a breakdown of trust between one or more stakeholders? Does it have to do with human capital, with a lack of well-being? Does it have to do with financial capital? Or does it have to do with natural resources? Once we know that, then we can start to craft interventions to grow those forms of capital that'll essentially heal the pain points. So if you use an analogy of an athletics team, that team, if they're suffering from different injuries, if you can diagnose accurately what those injuries are and come up with a treatment to help improve their health, actually you're going to get a much more performance set of stakeholder partners, and that will deliver more performance of your business holistically, but also financially as you go. And as we start to move towards the end of this approach, we've also realized that it's the chief financial officers in companies that actually have become the core constituents for what it is that we're doing, because they realize that you can take something like economics and mutuality and you can move out of the mindset of sort of sustainability at a cost to scalable stakeholder capitalism, maybe at a profit. And I'll tell you, we've applied this in a number of business situations where we've seen 2 times the retained earnings by repositioning the company away from extracting value to actually solving problems of ecosystem stakeholder partners. And by doing so, creating more highly performant businesses. So it really is something that is extraordinary, because it challenges the underlying premise of financial capitalism, which is really about, if you want to keep for yourself, you need to take from others. And with this approach, it's really about how do we help the others to perform better. And by so doing, you wind up getting a double benefit for yourself as you go. So we've figured out that working with the CFOs, that we look at what's called the P&L, the profit and loss statement that's in the internal management accounts. And we figured out how to add another line to the financial P&L that's called a mutual profit P&L that we can use to compare what the impact is on social, human, or natural capital of your business activity. And we can compare that with what the financial performance is of that business activity, knowing that because there's this link between growing social, human, or natural capital and having greater performance, that there's also a link between damaging social, human, or natural capital through your business activity and that being a drag on your financial P&L. But again, you don't see that if you don't actually reflect it. And the only point I want to make about integrating this mutual profit approach into a P&L is that as soon as you have this transparency where you can actually see what kind of impact you have on social, human, or natural capital, then it creates a whole different set of conversations among your managers that actually wind up delivering decisions and behaviors that actually deliver what the company says its purpose is, instead of just delivering maximized shareholder returns, often at the expense of delivering what you say you stand for as a company. And then the last piece of this is really about leadership. We really believe that you need committed leaders who are forward thinking to realize that we're in a different context economically in the world than we were 50 years ago when Milton Friedman introduced financial capitalism in 1970. At that time, we had a shortage of financial capital in the global economy, but we had a big excess of natural resources and also of labor that was matching the talent that labor that was matching the kinds of jobs that were being created at that time. Well, through Friedman's capitalism, we've solved the problem of financial capital. We now have a dysfunctional excess of money in the global economy, way too much, which is why we have negative interest rates in some countries as a norm, not an exception. And on the other side, we have a drastic shortage of natural resources. We're consuming far more as a corporate world than the planet can reproduce on its own. And also, labor and talent is no longer matching the kinds of jobs that are being created in a new form of economy that's called the knowledge economy or the digital economy or the sharing economy, or other forms of capital, maybe social value, that enables you to network and create the access to the knowledge you need to do what you want to do, rather than just money that you're accumulating under the old system. We're seeing a really different context with new rules of the game, but the model is not adjusting. Businesses are not adjusting. So leadership is key. So we run economics and mutuality executive education programs through our partner at Oxford University's Said Business School, and we're going to be expanding that work. And we also spend a lot of time trying to work with other leading universities around the world to integrate the teachings of economics and mutuality at the MBA and management school level. So with that, I think I'll leave it, because I know we're quite pressed for time, and I'd love to take some questions before we move on.
Thank you so much, Jay. I really enjoyed again your thoughts, and I really like the metaphor between sort of the present paradigm shift and then also Copernicus time. So very nice. I allow now Sonja to take over to run the Q&A session. So I'm sure we will gain some more insights through that. So please, Sonja.
Thank you for sharing your insights and experience on working with economics of mutuality movements.
Sorry, you're breaking up, Sonja. I wasn't getting it clear. I wasn't able to hear you.
Oh, that's too bad. Let me check my connection.
Okay,
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I was just thanking you for sharing your insights and experience on working with the economics of mutuality movement. And I could start with some questions I have after following the economics of mutuality for quite some time now, and we have also received some questions in the Q&A box, and please feel free to bring more of those from the audience. One thing I would like to start with, you quickly refer to this, but still to elaborate a bit further, many in our audience are probably more familiar with the concepts of corporate responsibility and business sustainability. So could you still elaborate the main differences between the economics of mutuality philosophy and CSR and business sustainability?
Yeah, I think CSR was really a kind of first stage attempt by companies to start to think more purposefully. Unfortunately, CSR has turned out to be something that's very difficult to scale, as I mentioned in my introduction, because it really requires companies to trade profit to do some good for people and planet through an initiative. And so we've looked at a lot of CSR reports from companies, and we've never really found one that scales up in any way, because if something is inherently requiring this profit trade-off for doing some good, there's always going to be a cap on it by the shareholders through the chief financial officers of the company. And similarly with sustainability, sustainability is very important. And so this is not to denigrate at all the important work on sustainability, but this is not a sustainability initiative. This is economics and mutuality is a business model management innovation. So it's about utilizing the non-financial forms of capital by, if you think about business is you only manage what you measure. And so in the current business model of most companies, they've only got the metrics to manage one out of the 4 forms of capital. We've now delivered metrics that are simple, stable, uniform, and robust scientifically that companies can actually utilize to capture more of the holistic value that is actually available to the company and to put it into practice with management practices, like changing what are called the key performance indicators, the KPIs for managers, what they're remunerated on with their bonuses. We now add these non-financial forms of value to the KPIs of businesses. And by so doing, we change the way businesses operate and they wind up delivering more profitable outcomes, but by not chasing the money. And so I think that's really one of the key differences in what we're doing is that we don't have to trade profit for doing good for people and planet. It's an inherent part of the model that by capturing more of the value and growing the non-financial forms of capital, you get better business performance traditionally as well, and it scales up.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the clarification. I would like to have this question coming from the audience to be discussed next. That what would be the key takeaways for startups from the point of view of economics of mutuality? And it is being elaborated further that in many ways it is much easier to implement the way of thinking from the very beginning. But as a recent founder, it would be interesting to hear your thoughts on this, whether this topic has come up in your discussions or not for startups.
Well, working for 14 years in Mars before we moved out into this independent public benefit foundation, Mars is known to be a very discreet company, some say even secretive. And so we intentionally did not give a lot of visibility to the work that we're doing. And it's coming out of a large multinational corporation. But I was reminded with this question of the first time I actually spoke to a group of entrepreneurs, and actually they were mostly CEOs of startup companies in a semi-public way many years ago. And somebody stood up and asked me that question. They said, okay, this is all fine and good coming from a large multinational corporation, but what about me? I'm in a startup. How can I do this? Is this even applicable for me? And I hadn't expected the question, and I kind of laughed because my first reaction was to say that actually you as a head of a startup have it so much easier than we working within a large multinational corporation, where it's like trying to turn a super tanker in the ocean, whereas you're not inhibited in a startup like you are in a multinational company about having to convince so many managers who only know one thing, financial capitalism, on how they have to kind of open their minds to be receptive of a better way, to unlearn some of the bad habits of financial capitalism, to learn that there's a way that you can actually capture all 4 forms of value. And I have found nothing to suggest in my work that this isn't just as applicable to a startup as it is to any size company. And actually it can be applicable to any type of an organization, because virtually every organization in any field is working with multiple forms of capital. They're just ignorant of the fact that there's ways in which you can manage, measure, and mobilize those other forms of capital, and then work within an ecosystem context to solve problems of others. Every activity has an ecosystem of stakeholders in it, but this is a very purposeful, intentional way of figuring out who they are and how to address their needs in a way that collectively helps the ecosystem, including you.
Great, that's a good observation, that it is applicable to every organization in every industry for every size, basically. Then another question from the audience asking, does the Economics of Mutuality Foundation have prioritized projects? Is there something specific you are currently working on?
We do. I mean, Mars was quite generous with us after being the internal think tank of the company for since the 1960s. They allowed us actually to take the IP, the intellectual property that we had created, out of the company free of charge, and to put it in this independent public benefit foundation. And also Mars is contributing 5 years of funding to help us get started. And in exchange, we just have to make sure that we implement economics of mutuality wherever there is demand inside Mars. So I think I mentioned in my introduction that we're working with multiple business segments, including the two mega segments that comprise Mars, which is pet care, about a $20-some billion segment, and then the what's called Mars Wrigley Global Confectionery. And within those two big segments at Mars, there are many business units that we're actually working with to implement economics of mutuality. We also have to educate executives from across Mars, and so we educate about 50 of them now every year through executive education training, which ramps up the demand. But we're also prioritizing now the work that we're doing with a private equity partner that I alluded to, which is to bring economics of mutuality both operationally into companies in the high-tech space that this private equity partner has already acquired in its existing portfolio of assets. So that brings it into a new sector of the economy. But more importantly, we're exploring the idea in partnership with these private equity friends of creating an investment platform that would be separate from our organization, but that would be empowered by EOM purposed investment funds that would be venture capital, private equity, public equities, debt, whatever it may be, that would be created to acquire companies with the purpose of turning them around using economics of mutuality as a investment framework and then as an operational tool for turnaround. So that's a really high priority for members of our team now, as is delivering what we've promised to Mars as we go forward and taking this into other sectors of the economy.
Great, thank you for the in-depth answer. And I think we have still time for one question, and it's coming from Kaisa. What has been the response from the ecosystem members when the large companies such as Mars has started using this novel approach and novel KPIs, meaning non-financial? Have they also started changing their metrics and ways of measuring?
That's a very good question, and I can't say that we've spent a lot of time yet working with the ecosystem partners to have them implement economics of mutuality. But I think we're finding a great receptivity to this, because it's when you're making decisions as a business unit leader, it's often based strictly on pure return on investment approaches. And so it's often counterintuitive to think about your work in the context of an ecosystem with stakeholders that have problems, and that their problems actually might be your problems, because if you could help them, or if you can help architect solutions to their problems, that they actually would be better performers in that ecosystem and that you would benefit from it. So it carries business thinking a couple of steps further in depth than businesses are used to. And I think stakeholders really are very pleased when they get approached by our team on behalf of the larger corporation that they may be working with in that ecosystem, because they realize how much the company is actually caring about what is important to them. And that makes them more loyal partners, more stable partners, partners that actually want to promote what it is you're doing. And I'll give you one really tangible example. The Royal Canin business is one of our key clients at Mars, and it's about a $5 or $6 billion business, as I remember, selling nutraceutical, very high nutrition pet food. That's also quite expensive, so it's something that only wealthier pet owners can afford. But this company, around the world, you'll really be hard pressed to find any advertising for this product, and it's because the social capital, sort of the trust of the stakeholders in that ecosystem, like the veterinarians, like the breeders and so forth, the trust level is so high that they wind up recommending the product to the pet owners, because they know how good it is for the pets and it makes their job easier. And that's the kind of thing that we're after, is creating relationships that are reciprocally beneficial, so that you don't have to do business in the purely traditional way that's cash and carry.
Fantastic example with the Royal Canin. I think it's perfect spot to end here with the Q&A session. Thank you, Jay, very much. I apologize we weren't able to answer all the questions that you sent. Thank you so much for them. And yes, fantastic if you can still take a look at the Q&A box, Jay, but I thank you here very much. We were very privileged to have you on board from Washington, DC. And now over to you, Alexandra.
Thank you, Jay and Sonja, for the presentation and the Q&A. And a warm welcome to Dr. Thomas Girst. We'll discuss together later based on the questions, but we'll dive into a more specific part of the ecosystem collaborations or relations regarding businesses and the arts and culture sector. Please, Thomas.
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Alexandra. Of course, Ia, Max, and Sonja from co-founders. It's great to be back. I don't try to be, it's always when you talk about what is going on with culture, especially now in the time of the pandemic, you somehow always tend to repeat yourself, which is sometimes a great thing to drive the message home. But at the same time, I get bored with it, so I'm trying to improvise a little bit today, but just doing this from the top of my head. I have, of course, notes spread around me, but basically improvise a little bit like this sign that you see behind me. And I want to jump right in regard to what Jay said when he talked about the purpose of business, even mentioning Milton Friedman, and then actually ending up when it comes to what, where this was actually a great handing over in regard to the talks when it comes to me talking about, mutual platforms, things that can be beneficial, to both partners. We talk a lot about, the dialogue between culture and the arts, but what is that dialogue really about? And where can that dialogue actually lead us? So picking up from Milton Friedman, I think it was him who said, and that's something that Jay kind of paraphrased at the very beginning, is that the only business of business is to do business. So where does that leave us with all this, CSR approach that we briefly spoke about, and with all the cultural engagement that comes from businesses around the world? Luckily, I'd have to say, apart from what cultural institutions are able to expect from more or less, depending on the country, from the public sector. So there's. And I think I've mentioned it maybe in the last talk, but there's the greatest definition of a brand that I've ever heard is by John Haggerty. If you've seen Mad Men, you probably remember or you can envision, 1960s Broadway advertisement agencies. And he said a brand is a piece of real estate in somebody else's mind. So where does that leave us? If a brand is a piece of real estate in somebody else's mind, then it might be more, than just, the core business. If I compare the core business of BMW, which is great luxury cars, hopefully in everybody's mind, and also, making the right transfer to with the right technology towards a sustainable future, then, what does differentiate us? The miles per hour is pretty much the same. The colors are. So what is that piece of real estate that actually defines a brand and that makes people, pay extra money for that brand? And that is where, the reputation and the visibility comes in, I believe, where just the sheer continuity and the sheer reliability of our cultural engagement on the side of BMW comes in after 50 years of celebrating partnerships around the world, hundreds of them for the past half century. We're celebrating 2021, the 50th anniversary of our cultural engagement. But I wanted to start with the question of where do we go from here? And from here, of course, I mean the pandemic. And yes, I'm an optimist at heart, so I don't. But I don't also feel like we shouldn't not talk about what is going on at the moment, because culture is definitely on a global scale going through very, very tough times. And it was another economist, a great economist, Warren Buffett, who said, only when there's a tide, who was wearing pants and who wasn't. So I sometimes find, and I wrote about that also, that the lip service of many cultural institutions of audience development, of trying to lure more people in, of making their museum more diverse, of making their cultural institution also welcoming for less affluent and less educated audiences. This is now the same people that are being let go by those cultural institutions. And cultural institutions should more or less also be about not be just not be about something only, but for someone. And I think that is where cultural institutions sometimes, also when it comes to generating budget from company sides, would have to get off their high horse. Would have to somehow get rid of some of the red tape that still surrounds them. Antrash Santo, who often advises us on cultural engagements on a global scale, he's based in New York City. He just wrote a book about the future of museums, and he spoke with 28 museum directors, and they all basically, the gist of it is that they said we need to get off our high horses. That doesn't mean that anybody gets to decide what hangs on their walls or what is being performed when we talk about theaters or music, but it is about accessibility. And I believe that there are many ways to come out of this pandemic in the parameters that I've just sort of tried to define through Milton Friedman and also John Haggerty and also Warren Buffett, and that is something that Harari, who you probably all read with his short history of humankind, mentioned in the Financial Times, when he said, look, and I can only paraphrase now and shorten his argument, but he said, either we come out of this pandemic, as part of an international moment of solidarity, or we're back in national isolation. And also Chris Durkon, who runs, I don't know, hundreds of museums as the president of a museum institution across France, the former director of the Tate London, Chris Durkon said, all of a sudden cultural institutions have become national institutions again because the borders are all closed. So will there be international solidarity at the end of the day, or will there be national international solidarity or national isolation? And I would, of course, like to argue for international solidarity, but I wouldn't want to go as far as call it solidarity. But I think, and this is where the mutual platforms come in that I want to talk about, I think that that we can, if we take the best of what has happened in the pandemic, and as sick as we are of those Zoom conferences, it has jump-started the digital, also in the cultural world somewhat. All these things were there before, but now we're actually making use of them, is that alliances will count. And I see alliances pop up everywhere. There are galleries that are not, that just shy away. And before that, it was a huge burden for them from the overhead of international art fairs, of presenting their artists there and presenting their works there and curating a show there. They just now start to switch galleries between Berlin and Paris, for example, just switching gallery space and tapping into completely new audiences. There's a hotel in Vienna that just opened up shop, or I believe 3 months ago before the whatever umpteenth lockdown, for 30 galleries to present their work in rooms, in temporary rooms throughout the hotel. So I see the greatest gallery probably on the planet right now, the blue chip gallery David Zwirner, open up his platform, to also showcase the work of younger galleries in New York City. And he does a great thing that way. He's like the Robin Hood of the art world now, without posting a single advertisement, just like this dog food industry that is so credible by a word of mouth that you can actually do good things and have others talk about the good things that you do and share some of your power without this interfering with your power. It's great for David Zwirner to open up his gallery, his website, and actually show the work of younger gallerists that are struggling, who also confirm to the media that they're making money off of David Zwirner opening this platform up for them. I was in London during October.
Hi, sorry, Thomas, we cannot hear you for some reason. I think your something happened with your microphone. We cannot hear you.
Oh,
Yes.
I was.
Yes, now we can hear you. Something happened.
For how long was I not?
Just 1.5 minutes. So if you go back a little bit, that would be.
Have you listened to what I was saying? Because then where did you lose me?
Just a half a minute ago, after you mentioned David Zwirner's way of opening his platform.
Okay.
Okay, cool.
Gonna get Right in. Thank you. Sorry,
Right.
I don't know what is going on. It didn't touch anything, but thank you.
Yeah.
Let me know when nothing works once again. So I'm just continue. So the last thing was I was in October. I was in London, and there I spoke with the president of Christie's, and they actually opened. In October they opened their rooms to the 154 Contemporary African Art Fair because they didn't need their showrooms, to show their work that was going up for the evening sale through Christie's auction on a global scale. Everything was virtual anyway, and they couldn't allow many people into the gallery, so they opened up their space, for this other art fair. That's very commendable, and it would just be my hope that these things will actually carry on, that the alliances that are being made at this very moment will be something that will continue. And just a little bit about my background also. I wrote about, my PhD was about Japanese American internment camps on the West Coast during World War II in the United States. And it was there that, and I was looking into, can art and literature actually take place in these camps where, that were created in barren lands. There was barely material to draw or paint or even write. There was a lot of propaganda and censorship and manipulation involved. But it turns out, of course, wherever human beings are, because art is so essential to us as an expression, that no matter how much budget there is involved, art will find its way. So I'm not actually worried about the arts or culture. I'm worried about the platforms, the visibility, the exposure the arts can get, and how the arts can contribute to what human beings are able to create beauty. And there should be a lot of exposure in this regard, and there should also be a lot of companies that are actually helping cultural institutions and artists to thrive. The most important thing is always, to pay your artists, to pay the artists that you're working with, and not just say, look, you're getting some exposure and visibility and we're offering you a great platform, but actually pay them, for every talk that they do, for every little thing that you ask them for. It would be great. Many don't, and that would be, one of the first rules of engagement is to pay your artists. And it's a great thing for companies, for their image and for their reputation. Also, with the target audiences that they want to reach. There's nothing being done for philanthropic or altruistic reasons. Let's be clear about that. It's done for the image and the reputation of the company. That doesn't mean you need to interfere with the arts. That doesn't mean you interfere with the creative process, but it means you throw your weight behind something. Ideally, you return something to the society that you do successful business in by your engagement in the arts. So that's where, again, CSR, corporate social responsibility, although you may not be able to measure it, which drives my marketing colleagues insane, but it does a lot, for the image of the company, because the way that people look at companies from the outside has a lot to do, I would say, in the last 10 years, also in regard to how do they behave, along the entire value chain of the company, not only when it comes to their core product, not only when it comes to their tens of thousands of employees or 125,000 as with BMW on a global scale, but how would they behave if they were a person within society? And that brings me back to the to the real estate of what a brand is in somebody else's mind. So that is not only a garage or a beautifully designed car within, but it could also be an opera house, a gallery, a museum. And that is where I think that or I would wish, at least, that in a post-pandemic world, making the most of those alliances that I see creeping up, people that probably wouldn't have talked to each other before the pandemic, now creating something and sharing their power to a certain extent to make, in this case, the arts more visible. I mean, make no mistake, there is, I think New York institutions have let go 15,000 people in the art world already. And a lot of museums and cultural institutions fear that they would have to let go within the next 2 years 1/3 of the entire workforce. So these things are happening while we speak. There will be less funding because the companies are also making less. But we might get out of this also realizing how important the arts are to what holds us all together. At least that would be my hope. And in a recent study, of 20 big players, European players, they looked at, the importance of the arts, the importance of culture. And it turns out, of course, as I always keep saying, that we know at the latest since Richard Florida's definition of the creative class, that the arts play in post-industrial societies, are also a crucial economic factor. In Europe, there are 28,000 museums, which is 1/3 of the global number of museums. And there is 7.6 million people employed in the arts across Europe. And only 10% of those rely on funding, rely on public funding. So the myth of all the culture only being in existence because of public funding is not only true. There's behind many arts and behind many players, not only the galleries, there's a business case behind this, and they don't necessarily need the budget from the government, although that is something that is, of course, of importance, because you shouldn't leave it to the businesses to sponsor the arts or partner with the arts, which would always be better than sponsoring, because sponsoring is a monetary transfer from A to B, whereas I would say that partnership is more or less not a transaction, but also an interaction. And that is what I also mean with the new alliances, that you can tap into the know-how and the network of great companies, such as, if you're curious as an artist or a cultural institution, of BMW, what they're doing in technology, what they're doing with VR and AR and whatnot, that can also benefit what your line of work. So I would say that curiosity and actually recognizing your partner and wanting to learn and remaining curious, I think, are fantastic character traits. And also, when I speak about alliances, and I'm looking at the clock, so I'm just going to be talking for 2 more minutes, and there's so much more to say, obviously, but is that if you look at certain platforms, and I just did my homework because I was interested in regard to the people that I also spoke to, is, of course, we all know crowdfunding and we've heard about this, but it's also, there is, if you know GoFundMe, or if you know OnlyFans, or if you know these masterclass initiatives, or most importantly, for example, Patreon, you know that Patreon has a turnover of 100 million euros. That might not be that much, but Patreon is a platform where artists can match with those that want to present them with budget so they can continue their work. The moral or ethical question is now, what of a cut do those digital platforms get out of this? And Patreon has been criticized for getting too much of a cut by just making this platform possible. But at the same time, this goes back to something that I think Kevin Kelly, he was the founder and founding editor of Wired magazine, if you remember. And he said that in 2008, and I'm talking now from the artist perspective, if you're an artist and you have 1,000 true fans, which provide you with $100 a year, and $100 a year is not even $10 per month. It's like $8 per month. And if you generate 1,000 fans, you can work off, these fans. You have 100,000 per year, which kind of should let you do what it is that you want to do. So I think that although these things have existed before the pandemic, when it comes to mutual platforms, when it comes to these new alliances, these are the things that I think at least have the potential to thrive if we think about humankind on this planet as benefiting beauty, as creating something that goes up against all the ugliness that we face every single day, be it xenophobia or nationalism or all these different things, that haunt us all the time. I think all of you listening in are, and I'm happy only 8 people dropped off while I started speaking. That's actually very good for my ratio usually. Is that we all work in this line of beauty, and we should continue doing that and tap into those alliances to make the arts stronger. And I can say that as somebody who does that from the corporate side and does it with a strong belief in leaving culture as is and not interfering with the creative process. And because creative freedom is such an amazing thing, and we have to look at the arts that were also defined by the great German thinker Theodor Adorno, who had to flee the Nazis, of course, like so many else. In Moralia, he said, whatever resists the domination of the material world whatever resists the domination of the material world, is what he defines as culture. So the culture is also a refuge, and no matter whether the companies get involved with it, they should heed these mottos or sentences by great thinkers in terms of generating the right sensibilities to make these mutual platforms actually thrive for both partners in the cultural and in the company realm. Thank you very much. I'll leave it at that for the moment.
Thank you so much, Thomas. I really love the idea of culture as a refuge, because I think we all feel it nowadays when we don't have access to museums, we don't have access to exhibitions, to live performances in every way. So great to hear your thoughts about this side of the ecosystem collaborations. I'd like to kick off the Q&A session with asking you if you have a specific model at BMW where you map out the common goals with partners in the arts and culture sector so that you form this mutually beneficial partnership. Do you have a specific model, or can you open anything up related to this?
When I teach cultural management, I mostly say that, look, the cultural management happens in practice. It doesn't happen in theory. So we don't actually have a template. And if we had it, we wouldn't share it. Also because, we don't want to make it easier for people to approach us. Just make an effort and try harder, like everybody else. So why not? But what I also mean is that we like to approach institutions proactively instead of reacting, to inquiries that we get. I mean, it's a shame, I get 2,000. The more you do in culture, the more inquiries you get, and we get probably 2,000 inquiries per year from around the world. And it's easy to say, of course, no, we cannot do this exhibition, or we cannot partner with this theater production. But now, of course, there are calls for help. In the past year, there have been so many calls for help from artists, from cultural institutions, and that's just painful, because that has entered, my line of work in a very new and rapid way, where I just see, where I just think my role will also have to change a little bit if we can donate X amount of money to this institution or give something to that institution. I feel like that's not, I'd never want to end up on the side of the bling bling, even though I work in the luxury business, but, do something where you create something meaningful. You can make it a huge difference, with 10,000 euros, and you can make a lot of mistake with 100,000 euros. So we don't have an approach, but we have a theory, of course, which shouldn't be based on your personal affinities, never, but strategically on what your values stand for, what you think your values stand for as a company in your core business. So we have our cultural engagement defined by the arts, by architecture and design. Of course, that's where we come from. But also when it comes to classical music, jazz, and sound, which has become so much more important now that cars don't make a sound anymore. You need to work with composers to come up with these sounds. So I think that is where I set the coordinates also very loosely, because they have to, people in the entire world will have to, like all the colleagues will have to adhere to them. And I want to keep it soft because I don't want to restrain them, because within their country, different rules might apply. So we keep that very loose, and we help them as much as we can to engage, with the right institutions at the right time.
Thank you. Yes, another question is, you talked about the benefits for branding and for helping each other and creating mutual benefits, of course. How do you see the collaborations with the arts for the company culture? How has this been throughout your time at BMW? You have quite a few years.
Well, I think these things have actually changed a little bit. I remember when I came into the company and we had just built, this great plant in Leipzig with Zaha Hadid. Before she won the Pritzker Prize, a woman that passed away way too early. I don't need to tell anyone. She had a huge influence she had on me. And so with Zaha Hadid, of course, you had the Chancellor of Germany, which was a guy before Merkel that nobody remembers. But the thing is, so you had the Chancellor of Germany there, because there was a great story to tell about German business, actually staying in Germany and Eastern Germany. And you had our CEO there, and you had Zaha Hadid there. Just guess who CNN came for. not our chancellor, not our CEO, but certainly for Zaha Hadid. So there were people actually, my colleagues, and said, oh, she's jumping on the bandwagon of BMW, to create great visibility for herself. And I just thought nothing better can happen to us than Zaha Hadid talk, because we're part of the narrative. She built a BMW plant. So this is fantastic. So I think there was a little bit of apprehension when you think that the car is the star, which is the right thing to think, yeah. But as you have seen everywhere, what is growing is the X between a brand and an artist or something. So I see also when I talk about the alliances, I also mean the X between those names. You have, I don't know, Peter Doig doing something for Dior now. You had, you had Virgil Abloh doing some. I mean, Virgil Abloh is pretty much doing something with everyone, but also with our competition. But who cares? So the thing is, that's what I mean is, I think there can be something meaningful in that X, and that continues because we all know they are bringing something to the brand that the brand is probably missing: cutting edge, sophistication, coolness factor, and of course an audience of 5 million Twitter followers. So, instead of just buying a person to get the word out, you just cooperate with them on a level that doesn't need to be doesn't need to only reek of business, but can actually create something beautiful. Why not? So I would always go for that. And I think there's actually a good future ahead for this, because we haven't seen the end of that happening. On the contrary.
Thank you. Yeah, indeed, it is about matching the two, the two parts in a way that is really, really create something beautiful. And speaking about creating something beautiful with the arts, how do you feel that, especially in this current situation where everyone is working remotely, how do you feel about the role of the arts when businesses and the art sector collaborate, about how people are feeling inside the company? Do you think it creates more engagement collaborating with the cultural sector inside the company? I mean, for the people at BMW, for instance.
I wish I could say yes, but and although I'm an optimist, no. Everybody is focused on their stuff. Look, last year, I have a budget. We have contractual agreements. Many of the things, which are always like free concerts with tens of thousands of people in Moscow, in London, in Berlin, in Munich, it's like they all had to be canceled. So what happens with the budget? It doesn't stay with the cultural institutions because they don't deliver on their part of the contractual agreement. They didn't expect to, retain the money. Money comes back into the company. I cannot spend it on another cultural engagement. Of course, it goes back to the company, which really needs the money in a year where we're not selling as many cars as we usually do. So I completely understand the intricacies of this, and I think it's the right thing to do. But so the arts are in very dire straits. I mean, these singers and if you are playing a violin, it's like you're a high performing sports person, right? It's like you're like a marathon runner, and if you cannot do your marathon, if you cannot play your violin, where does that leave you? We're working with the State Opera in Berlin, and we actually created a concert that was only for those for free that were, first responders, helping nurses, whatever, doctors and people, working in supermarkets. And then we had, it was the 250-year anniversary of Beethoven. And then, the choir comes out for Beethoven's 9th Symphony, which is also, the national, the anthem of the European Union, and you have the choir come out, and half of them were crying. And I did a Facebook Live interview with Ann-Sophie Mutter, the great violinist, and she actually said, culture is the cure. Culture is the vaccine. It's there's a very strong belief in the arts, and I have no doubt they will survive. But to say that, we are now looking for refuge in the arts on a broader scale, no, because we cannot participate, because the arts are somewhat inaccessible through the way that we are used to accessing the arts. So let's just read and stay at home and listen to amazing music on our, whatever we have, Spotify. Yeah. Yeah,
and how to reinvent the access to the arts, even in these kind of conditions.
We'll get through this. We will get through this smiling, and things will turn out to be better. Always.
Always an optimist. Thank you so much. And a pleasure to have you on board. We'll continue with the rest of the program. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Alexandra. Let's see if we get the camera on for Jamie and Lila here in a minute. Lila is online already. Jamie can turn on the camera as well. So just some time ago, co-founders came up with the idea that we would help to establish a community of Generation Z. So the next generation that are still studying, not necessarily yet entering the work life, some of them are, but still in the midst of their studies. How can we tap on that talent, that global talent, the best of them, so to say, to help our clients get their insight, their questions, because their questions might be a little bit different than ours, and how can companies benefit from this? So I have two community members with us on this event, Lila, that was presented earlier, and Jamie presented as well, both in the midst of their studies and activists in this Lionhearts community. So we'll start off by Lila with the first question. Why did you establish, or why does Lionheart exist?
Okay, so I think that it has already been explained quite a lot in this talk that the role of businesses is not only about making profits anymore, it's not only about fulfilling individuals' ambitions. Of course, that's a crucial aspect of it. However, their purpose is also to make a beneficial impact on their ecosystem, whether that be the natural environment or the society and its members as a whole. Now, a lot of business leaders are willing to take on that transition and to take on the challenge, which is quite hard at its core. However, a lot of them don't really know how to do it or where to start, and this is where Lionhearts come in. By creating Lionhearts about almost a couple of years ago now, thanks to co-founders, the idea was to see how could young people help businesses do these kind of transitions. The reason for that is that we young people are often the first ones to point out when there's a problem or criticize society or the world, so to speak. And so it's only logical for us to become part of the solution. We obviously don't have the presumption to say that we know more or better than the business leaders. That's just not true. But we can have a more audacious and innovative outlook on things. And so we think that that combined with the skills and experience of business leaders, we can come up with some very innovative opportunities for change and solutions to those key global issues.
So Lila, more concretely speaking, what can you actually do?
Well, so Lionhearts is a community of young people between the age of 18 and 28. And our main asset is our diversity. We have very different members. We gather more than 5 nationalities who speak 10 languages or more. We go to 13 different universities and we study very different fields. We have students in law, biology, biochemistry, engineering, politics, economics. We also have pianists, musicians, the broader term, sorry. We have songwriters, authors, we have programmers, and of course, entrepreneurs. So the idea is that we're not constrained to an area or scope of action at all. And so we can help with a lot of things. So to give you some examples, we can give guidelines on communication. How do you want to promote that transition that you're doing? How do you want to explain it, either to outside of your business or within the organization itself? We can also help, for example, with the corporate culture, as it was said earlier. How do you sort of navigate through new values and purposes? How do you implement them in your business? We can also talk about how to implement applicable sustainability solutions. How do you want to improve and have a more beneficial impact on your natural environment? We also have ideas for marketing and how do you want to promote to a younger audience? How do you want to explain those challenges that you're going through and promote that? We can also sometimes work as a focus group and do, for example, product reviews. That's completely in our scope as well. So very concretely speaking, we can do written pieces such as reports or action plans or strategy analysis. We can immerse ourselves for 1 or 2 weeks into business to understand its culture, because it's sometimes hard to really grasp the nature of business that fast. But we can also have just a half-an-hour chat about the certain projects of a company. So that being said, we don't only work with businesses, although I've talked about them quite a lot. We also work with charities and NGOs, and so I'm actually going to let Damien explain that further.
Thank you, Lila. So, Damien, let's run into one of the projects that Lionhearts have.
Sure.
working on. Could you please drive us through a little bit what happened with the Baltic Sea Action Group?
Of course, the Baltic Sea Action Group. So hello, my name is Jamin. Yeah, I was actually a part of the Baltic Sea Action Group project last year in August 2020. So just to give you some context, there were 3 parties involved. There were the Lionhearts, so us, that included the psychology students or students of psychology, political science, economists, physicists, and so forth. And the second party was the Baltic Sea Action Group, which is actually a non-profit aimed to maintain the ecological composition of the Baltic Sea for the better of all parties that depend on it. And the third party was actually Kvidia Farm. So Kvidia is a pilot farm in southern Finland at the cutting edge of self-sustaining carbon negative farming practices. So and they involve people from all over the value chain, from the farmers themselves to fuel production companies and scientists, environmental scientists, and so forth. So in the beginning, these 3 parties were brought together with the goal of raising awareness for the Baltic Sea Action Group amongst young people. So we were originally, the process went so that we were originally briefed from an executive of the Baltic Sea Action Group on their purpose, stakeholders, main activities, the scale of operations, and so forth. And we really got to understand the Baltic Sea Action Group from the inside at a level we couldn't just from reading about it or doing investigations on ourselves or by ourselves. Second, we went on an on-site to this Kvidia farm to see exactly some real examples of actions being taken to maintain the health of the Baltic Sea. So it, in the end, the reality was that it all starts from the farm, basically, and that became apparent quite quick. And then the third thing we did was we based on the things that we learned from the farmers and the scientists on site, we gathered our different perspectives to brainstorm. To solve our original goal of raising awareness. And this was also done on the farm. So it was a whole day field trip, and it was quite a holistic experience. And in the end, after a couple of weeks of drafting several versions of a report, we basically outputted, we submitted, we delivered an implementation report. So this report included 3 of our what we thought was the most promising projects that the Baltic Sea Action Group could take to dramatically increase the awareness that they have on in front of young people. So the first one was a unique internship program. It was designed to be very tailored towards young people that could drive engagement even outside of the people involved in the internship. So it would be linked to social media campaigns and such. And then the second was actually a specific plan and a strategy for a social media campaign and means to roll it out. This included more platforms that Baltic Sea Action Group wasn't familiar with, such as Instagram or even TikTok and things like that. I know it sounds a little bit strange, but it actually they liked it quite a lot. But the third one, which is I think the most promising, which we hope will come to fruition and is actually in the process of being implemented, is it's a project that involves a lot of engineering, guerrilla marketing, and actual concrete on-site farm-related implementation, which we can't talk about that much right now because, of course, there needs to be the surprise factor. But the theme of it is about bringing a real physical connection between everyday human life and everyday animal life. So this is a engineering project that's supposed to be interactive between Baltic Sea Action Group and the general public, specifically youth. I hope we'll soon, hopefully you'll all get to see that come to life. So yes, that's how I'd wrap up the Baltic Sea Action Group project.
Thank you. Yeah, interesting to see whether all of it comes alive and when, particularly, of course, the third one, which you put out there. But a couple of questions here. A lot of companies are working with interns and students. That's a normal way, of course, of working with the next generation and tapping into that talent. But if you compare that way of working compared to what Lionhearts could bring into the table, how would you position the advantages of working with Lionhearts about the diversity that the team includes and so forth? What is your view on that? What is the difference here, or is it kind of the same methodology, or what's the difference? Yes.
Should I go?
I'd also have an answer to that. Yeah, Lila, go ahead.
Okay,
Yeah.
sure. Well, I could bring one part of the answer. This is something we can witness here, so that we have such different personalities and such different areas of studies, sort of expertise, that we're going to come up with maybe 5, 6, 7 different solutions. And then it's kind of like the company or the business is going to be able to choose from that panel of solutions. So instead of being just students from a business school or just students from an engineering school and so on, we can kind of gather minds from a bit of everywhere. So we can see it with, for example, the Kvidia project, is that even in that report, which is only one piece of writing, we had 3 very separate parts, which kind of gathered all of our expertise and sort of what we like to work on most.
Yes. So if a business leader is interested in working with Lionhearts, how should he or she go ahead? What's the best way of getting in touch with you?
Well, basically, the best way is to go through co-founders right away. So you could contact Max and or Ia and then explain the project, and then co-founders will come and suggest a project to some Lionhearts, and then Lionhearts who are interested are going to come and work on that project.
Yeah, if we say somebody now in our audience currently might have interested or might know interested young persons who would like to consider applying for a membership in Lionhearts, what's the best way of potentially joining the community?
Yes, so there's my contact detail at the end of the presentation. So I invite anyone who would be interested in joining or who would know somebody who would like to join to just email me right away. And I would be more than happy to give them more information for that.
Thank you, Jamie and Lila, and looking forward to continue working with you and the community that you manage. And with that, I would thank you a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So over to Ia.
Yeah, I believe your microphone is
on. Okay, so
perfect.
Sorry. Yes, thank you, Jamin. So thank you so much to all of our speakers today, Jay, Thomas, Lila, and Jamin. And by listening to you all, I feel it becomes quite self-evident to all of us now that we and our businesses cannot really succeed without nurturing ecosystem relations. And I came to think of another inspiring leader, Microsoft's CEO Satya Nadella, who has said that unless and until we measure ourselves with the outcomes outside of our own balance sheet, there is really no long-term success. And I think what he said really emphasizes the power and importance of economics of mutuality. And today's event, I feel, provided us again with a lot of food for thought, and we are very happy to continue to elaborate them with you, all of our audience members. And as we're coming to the end of this event, I want to thank you for joining us today, and we really hope to see you in the next event in a couple of months' time again. So thank you for today, and see you soon.
I'm just going to go ahead and clap on behalf of everyone. Thanks, Ia.
Thank you, Jamin. I don't get my video on for some reason.
No, don't worry about it.
Yes.
Our live audience.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
It's missing.
Thank you. There were a lot of thank yous also from the audience. So very nice to see that.
Great. Thank you. We'll close this one then, and feel free to join us and also ask any questions you have in mind afterwards. We're all happy to help.
Thank you, Jamin and Lila. Very nice that you were with us. Thanks.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Bye.